My dear readers, today we're going to tell the story of a man who hid the world beneath a facade of ordinariness, until the day he stepped onto the stage and an entire empire knelt before him. This is a completely fictional story, so please watch until the end, and don't forget to leave a like and comment with the city you're currently viewing to let me know how far the story has progressed. The courthouse steps were empty at 7 in the morning, except for one man standing too still in a suit that didn't belong to him. Lucien DeLuca had worn black tailoring his whole adult life, the kind that cost more than most men's cars, cut by hands that knew his shoulders better than his own mother did. Today, he wore gray. Off the rack. A suit that said nothing, that hid everything, that let him stand on these steps and just be a man waiting for his wedding instead of the most powerful ghost in organized crime. His phone buzzed against his thigh. He didn't want to look at it. Some animal part of his brain already knew. The Heir had gone wrong 20 minutes ago, the kind of wrong a man only learns to recognize after years of reading rooms before they turn violent. He'd felt it in his gut before he'd felt it anywhere else. The silence on the other end of every unanswered text since 6 a.m. He looked anyway. Vanessa. He answered on the second ring, throat already tight in a way he hated himself for. Hey, you almost here? Lucienne. Her voice had a brightness to it that didn't belong in this conversation, a brightness he'd later understand was relief, not joy. I can't do this. The city kept moving behind him. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere a jackhammer started up, ugly and rhythmic, like the world had decided to provide a soundtrack for his humiliation. He pressed 2 fingers against his eyes. Can't do what, Van? Marry you. A pause, the kind people leave when they want you to fill the silence with something that makes their cruelty look smaller. He didn't fill it. I met someone. Preston Cole. You don't know him. He's God, Lucien. He's somebody. Real estate, hotels. His family's on the boards of half the charities in this city. I can't marry a guy who manages IT support for a logistics company. I can't do it. I won't. He stood very still on the steps, gray suit catching the early sun, and said nothing for 3 full seconds. 6 years. 6 years of late nights, of her crying about her father's debts, and him quietly making them disappear without ever telling her how. 6 years of being careful, so careful, to never let her see what he really was, because he'd wanted, just once, to be loved as a man and not as an empire. He'd built a wall around his entire existence, brick by brick, just to find out if there was a version of him that mattered without the throne underneath it. The answer, apparently, was no. You're really doing this an hour before the ceremony, he said. His voice came out flat, flatter than he expected. I'm sorry, I am, but I have to think about my future. Right. He almost laughed. Almost. Your future. She hung up first. He stood there with the phone still against his ear, listening to a dial tone that felt louder than it had any right to be, and somewhere behind his sternum something old and cold woke up and stretched. He could destroy Preston Cole's family by lunch. 3 phone calls. He knew exactly which calls, exactly which favors, exactly which men in exactly which rooms would make it happen without his name ever touching the wreckage. The thought arrived clean and immediate, the way violence always arrived in his mind. Not as rage, but as math. A problem with an obvious solution. He put the phone in his pocket instead. Not today. Not like this. He stood on the courthouse steps in his rented-feeling suit, alone, jilted, and strangely light, like a man who'd just set down something heavy he hadn't realized he was carrying. He'd lost the girl. He hadn't lost himself. Small mercy. The kind you take when it's the only one on offer. He was about to turn and walk back toward the parking garage, toward a car he'd drive himself because he never let security trail him on personal days, one of his last small rebellions against the Empire. When he heard heels on concrete, fast, uneven, like someone running in shoes that weren't built for it. Excuse me, sir, are you? He turned. A woman in cream silk, veil shoved back off her face, mascara already starting to track at the corner of one eye, stood 3 feet away breathing hard like she'd sprinted the last block. She looked for one disorienting second exactly like a bride, because she was one. Are you getting stood up too? She said. Not really a question, more like she already knew the answer and needed him to confirm it so the world would make a fraction more sense. Looks that way. Good. She laughed, but it cracked in the middle, the kind of laugh that's one wrong word from becoming something else entirely. Good. Because I just watched my fiancé walk out of a courthouse conference room with his hand on his assistant's waist, and I have a marriage license in my purse that's about to go to waste, and I am not walking back into that building and explaining to my family why there's no groom. Lucian studied her. Sharp jaw, sharper eyes, the kind of composure that was clearly costing her everything she had to maintain. A woman used to being underestimated and hating it. Serena Ashford, she said, sticking out a hand like they were at a business mixer instead of the wreckage of two separate weddings. He looked at her hand for a second longer than was polite. Then he shook it. Lucien. Lucien what? He almost told her. The name sat right behind his teeth. DeLuca. 2 syllables that made grown men in 3-piece suits go quiet in boardrooms, that made certain doors open before anyone knocked. He swallowed it instead. Just Lucien works. Something flickered across her face. She'd noticed the dodge, filed it away, said nothing. He respected that more than he expected to. This is insane, she said, mostly to herself. But I need an answer to a question, and I need it fast because in about 10 minutes my mother is going to come out of that building looking for me, and I refuse to give her the satisfaction of watching me fall apart in public twice in one lifetime. What's the question? Marry me. She said it like she was daring herself as much as him. Right now. Today. I have the license, the courthouse clerk's still on shift, and I would honestly rather marry a stranger out of pure spite than go back in there a single woman everyone whispers about for the next decade. He should have said no. Every rational part of him, and there were a lot of rational parts trained over 15 years to read risk before it bloomed into disaster, screamed that this was reckless, untraceable, the kind of impulsive move that could blow up a life built on careful invisibility. But he looked at her shaking hands, at the mascara she hadn't noticed was running, at the fury underneath the panic, and he thought about Vanessa's bright, relieved voice on the phone, and something in him, something tired of being careful, just said yes before his brain caught up. Okay? Her eyes went wide. Okay? Yeah. He almost smiled. First real one all morning. Let's do it. What? The clerk's office smelled like burnt coffee and toner. A bored woman behind the counter barely looked up from her screen when they came in breathless and asked, in near unison, if the marriage license window was still open. Got 15 minutes, she said. You two got your paperwork? Serena produced hers without hesitation. She'd clearly had it ready for a different man an hour ago. Lucian hesitated half a second before pulling his own from his jacket pocket, the one he'd carried for Vanessa, the one with his real name printed on it in government type. Lucien Adrien DeLuca. He watched Serena's eyes flick to it as the clerk processed them. She didn't say anything about the middle name, filed it away too, probably, the way she'd filed away his Dodge on the courthouse steps. He was starting to understand this woman collected information the way other people collected receipts, quietly, constantly, for a use she hadn't decided on yet. The ceremony itself took 4 minutes. A justice of the peace with tired eyes and a voice, like a man reading a grocery list, pronounced them married in a beige room with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. There was no music, no flowers. Serena's veil sat crooked on her head the entire time, and neither of them fixed it. When the justice said, "You may kiss the bride," they both froze for a half-second too long before Lucien leaned in and pressed his mouth to hers, quick and dry and strange. 2 strangers sealing a transaction neither fully understood yet. Outside, on the courthouse steps for the second time that morning, Serena turned to him with an expression caught somewhere between triumph and terror. "I don't even know your last name," she said. "DeLuca," he told her, and watched her test it silently, lips moving without sound. Serena DeLuca. She said it out loud this time, like she was trying it on. "God, my mother's going to have an aneurysm." "Mine would have too," he said, and didn't explain that his mother had been missing for 18 years and he had no idea, not really, whether she was even alive to be horrified by anything. A black car pulled up to the curb. Not one of his, he made sure of that. He'd called a regular service. And Serena hesitated by the door. "This is the part where you tell me this was a mistake," she said. "Where you say it was nice meeting me and we go get this annulled before lunch." He looked at her for a long moment. Thought about the empty apartment waiting for him, the one Vanessa had never wanted to move into because it was, in her words, too modest for a man with your potential. Thought about 6 years of hiding a throne under a desk job and ending up alone anyway. "Or," he said, "we could see what happens." Something in her face cracked open. Not the practiced toughness from the courthouse steps, but something underneath it, raw and surprised and a little bit hopeful, despite every instinct telling her not to be. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met," she said, "or the stupidest." Probably both. She got in the car. He got in after her. Neither of them noticed the man across the street lowering a phone after finishing a photograph, or the message that left his hand 30 seconds later, addressed to a number with no name attached to it, only a title. "Boss got married. Courthouse. No security present. Confirm orders." The reply came back in under a minute. "Do nothing. Watch. Report everything." The apartment Lucien brought her to wasn't what Serena expected. She'd assumed, somewhere in the chaos of the last 3 hours, that a man who dodged his own last name on courthouse steps was hiding something shameful. Debt, maybe, or a criminal record, or some embarrassing family secret he didn't want a stranger to stumble into. What she found instead was a clean, sparse 2-bedroom with exactly one expensive thing in it. A small silver pendant sitting in a dish by the door, the kind of object a person touches every day without thinking, worn smooth from 1,000 anxious fingers. "You live modest," she said, looking around at the second-hand couch, the bookshelf with more technical manuals than novels, the complete absence of any photograph showing his face before the age of maybe 20. "I like simple," he said, too quickly. She picked up the pendant before he could stop her. It was old, older than he looked, a tarnished thing with an engraving worn almost to nothing, just the ghost of letters that might once have spelled a name. "This is beautiful," she said. "Family piece?" His jaw tightened, just barely, just enough that a less observant woman might have missed it. She did not miss it. "Something like that," he said, and took it gently from her hand, setting it back in the dish with a care that told her more than any answer could have. Whatever that pendant was, it wasn't something like anything. It was the center of something he wasn't ready to say out loud. She decided, in that moment, standing in a stranger's apartment in a wedding dress that belonged to a different ceremony, that she was going to find out exactly what Lucien DeLuca was hiding. She had no idea yet how far down the hole went. Neither, really, did he. Because 3 miles across the city, in a tower with his name on the lease and none on the building directory, a man named Damian Cross was reading a text message about a courthouse wedding with growing, vicious interest, already calculating exactly how a forgotten, friendless tech manager named Lucien DeLuca might become useful to a plan 18 years in the making. And in a federal building downtown, a folder that had been sealed since a kidnapping case went cold 2 decades ago sat in an evidence room, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally pull the right thread and watch the whole carefully buried truth come unraveled. 3 weeks into the marriage, Serena learned that her husband didn't sleep so much as he kept watch. She woke at 4 in the morning out of habit. Old habit from a childhood where her mother checked locks twice and still didn't trust them, and found his side of the bed empty, sheets cold enough that he'd been gone a while. She found him in the kitchen, standing at the window with the lights off, phone in one hand, not looking at the screen, just holding it like a man waiting for it to do something. Lucien. He didn't startle. That bothered her more than anything else might have. A man should startle when his wife says his name behind him in the dark. Should at least flinch, should give some small human proof that he hadn't heard her coming from 3 rooms away. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "You're never asleep when I wake up." 3 weeks, Lucien, I've checked." She crossed her arms, suddenly aware of how thin her sleep shirt was, how exposed she felt standing in a kitchen with a man she'd married on a dare and still barely knew. "What is it you're so worried is going to come through that window?" "Nothing." He set the phone face down on the counter, a motion too smooth, too practiced, like a man who'd spent years making sure no one ever saw what was on his screen. Bad dreams. Goes back a long way. What kind of dreams? The kind I don't talk about. His voice wasn't unkind, but it had a wall in it, a flat finality she was starting to recognize as the sound of a door closing. Go back to bed, Serena. She didn't move. You know what's strange? In 3 weeks, you've never once asked me a single question about my family, my job, my past. Nothing. Most men talk about themselves nonstop on a first date, let alone a marriage. You're the opposite. You're a vault. Maybe I just like listening. Maybe you're hiding something. The silence that followed had teeth in it. She watched something pass behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Something colder and more controlled. The look of a man doing rapid math on how much truth a lie could survive. Everybody's hiding something, he said finally. You married a stranger on a dare 3 weeks ago. You really want to pretend you don't have your own locked doors? That landed. She felt it land, felt the old ache under her ribs. Her father's gambling, the debts, the calls from collection agencies she'd fielded since she was 19 years old, pretending to be older, pretending to be someone who could make problems disappear with a stern voice and a payment plan. She hadn't told him any of that either. Fine, she said. We're both vaults. Fair enough. She turned to go back to the bedroom, then stopped in the doorway, not looking back at him. But vaults crack eventually, Lucien. Mine's already got a hairline fracture. I'd start worrying about yours. Across the city, in an office on the 42nd floor of a building that didn't list its tenants, Damien Cross sat behind a desk too large for the work he actually did, watching a photograph rotate slowly on his monitor. Lucien and Serena leaving a grocery store, captured from across the street, mundane and domestic, and utterly beneath a man Damien had spent 18 years believing didn't matter. Tell me again, Damien said, not looking up, why I should care that the help got married. The man standing across from his desk, Reyes, mid-level security, the kind of man who'd learned a long time ago to keep his opinions out of his voice when talking to cross-family blood, shifted his weight. Because the wedding was at a courthouse with zero notice, zero security detail, and zero paper trail. People who do that are either stupid or scared, and Lucien DeLuca's never struck me as stupid. Damien finally looked up. He had his father's eyes, Victor Blackwell's eyes, though he carried the Cross name from his mother's side, a fact that had eaten at him quietly for 31 years, watching cousins and uncles inherit a name that should have included his, sharp, restless, perpetually unsatisfied. You think he's somebody. I think, Reyes said carefully, that a man who manages IT support for a logistics company doesn't usually have the instincts to make himself invisible. And this guy's invisible. I've pulled records, birth certificates thin, no childhood photos anywhere online, no social media before he was about 20. It's like he started existing as an adult. Damien leaned back in his chair, the photograph still rotating on screen. Lucien's face caught mid-laugh, easy, unguarded, a man who looked nothing like a threat. Keep watching him, Damien said, quietly. I don't care about the wife. I care about whatever he's invisible from. Serena's research started small. A name search, late at night, phone glowing under the blanket while Lucien slept, actually slept, for once, exhausted from something he wouldn't explain, beside her. Lucien Adrian DeLuca. The search returned almost nothing. A LinkedIn profile, 6 years old, sparse, generic. A voter registration. No yearbook photos, no childhood anywhere. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that for 2 more days, until the morning she found the box. It was in the back of his closet, behind a row of suits too expensive for an IT manager's salary. She'd noticed that too, filed it away the way she filed everything, the watch he wore that cost more than her car, the way he paid for everything in cash, never cards, never anything traceable. The box was unmarked, metal, locked with a small combination dial. She sat on the closet floor for 10 full minutes just looking at it before she heard his key in the front door and shoved it back exactly where she'd found it, heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth. That night at dinner, she watched him eat in that careful, contained way he always did. Small bites, methodical. A man who'd trained himself out of hunger as a visible thing, and she couldn't hold it anymore. "What's in the metal box in your closet?" His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Just for a second. Just long enough. You went through my closet. I was looking for a sweater. I found a locked box instead." "Don't make this about me snooping, Lucian. Make it about you having a locked box you've never once mentioned to your wife." "It's old paperwork." He set the fork down, jaw tight, that wall sliding into place again, the one she was getting sick of staring at. "Family stuff. Nothing that concerns you." Everything about you concerns me. I married you." Her voice cracked on the last word, surprising her. "I gave up my whole life for this. For you, a stranger I picked off a courthouse step because I was angry and humiliated, and I have spent 3 weeks trying to be a good sport about how little you give me. And I'm so tired, Lucien. I am so tired of living with a man who flinches every time I ask him a real question." "I don't flinch." "You do. You flinch like someone trained you to. Like flinching is the smart move and honesty's the mistake." She pushed back from the table, chair legs screeching against the floor. "What happened to you? Who taught you to be like this?" He looked at her for a long moment, and something almost surfaced. She saw it, the way you see a shape moving under dark water, there and then gone, before he shut it down, smooth as a blade going back into a sheath. "Nobody taught me anything," he said. "I just learned the hard way that the people you trust are usually the ones who hurt you worst. That's not a secret, Serena. That's just true." "Is that a warning?" "It's an observation." She left the table without finishing her plate. He sat alone in the kitchen a long time after, staring at the closed bedroom door, one hand pressed flat against his sternum like he was holding something in by force. The first real crack came 2 weeks later, at a business dinner Serena hadn't wanted to attend. A function for her mother's social circle, the kind of event where everyone measured everyone else's marriage in real time, smiling with their teeth while their eyes did the actual talking. Vanessa Hale was there. Of course she was there. The city wasn't big enough to avoid her forever, and apparently fate had decided 3 months was long enough to wait. Vanessa found Serena by the bar, looking radiant in a way that was clearly meant to be seen, Preston Cole's hand resting possessively at the small of her back. "You're the one who married him," Vanessa said, not a question, already smiling like she knew something Serena didn't. "The IT guy. His name is Lucian." "I know his name." Vanessa's smile didn't move, but something behind it sharpened. "I was engaged to him for 2 years. Honestly, you can have him. Sweet enough, but going nowhere, no ambition, no family money, no future. I did you a favor walking out, even if it didn't feel that way at the time." Serena felt her face go hot. "Funny, he doesn't talk about you at all." "He wouldn't. Lucien's good at not talking about things." Vanessa leaned in slightly, voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial, almost kind, which made it worse. "Honey, I dated that man for 2 years and I never once met his family. Never saw a childhood photo. Never met a single old friend. You think that's normal? You think that's love, marrying a man who doesn't exist anywhere before the day you met him?" "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I got out before I found out why." Vanessa straightened, smile sliding back into place like a mask resettling. "Good luck, Serena. You're going to need it." She walked away on Preston's arm, laughing at something he murmured in her ear, and Serena stood frozen at the bar with a glass of wine she didn't remember being handed, her own heartbeat suddenly very loud in her ears. Across the room, Lucien watched the whole exchange from a distance, jaw set, hands curled at his sides. Not from heartbreak, Serena would realize much later, but from the specific controlled fury of a man watching someone threaten the wall he'd spent years building. He crossed the room. "We're leaving. We just got here." "Serena, no." She set the wine glass down too hard, liquid sloshing over the rim, and the small violence of the sound seemed to surprise them both. "I want to know what she meant. No family photos, no old friends, nobody who knew you before you turned 20. Is that true?" His silence was its own answer. "Lucien, is it true? It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. That's the entire problem. Do you understand that? I don't know your parents' names. I don't know where you grew up. I don't know one single concrete fact about your life before you were an adult. And every time I ask, you give me this flinch, and then a wall, and I am done, Lucien. I am done living next to a locked door and being told it's none of my business. People nearby had started to notice, conversations dipping lower, eyes sliding toward them with the particular hunger of a social crowd that had just smelled blood. Not here, he said, low and urgent. Then where? When? You've had 3 months. He took her by the elbow, gentle but unyielding, and steered her toward the exit, past curious faces and Vanessa's triumphant watching eyes, out into the cold night air where the valet line waited under string lights that suddenly felt obscene in their cheerfulness. I'm not a bad man, he said, once they were alone by the curb, his voice low and rough in a way she hadn't heard before. Not the careful calm he always wore, something underneath it finally showing through. Whatever you think is in that box, whatever Vanessa's implying, I have never once put you in danger. I would die before I let anything touch you. That's not comforting, Lucien, that's terrifying. Normal husbands don't talk about dying to protect their wives from things they refuse to name. I know how it sounds. Then explain it. I can't. His voice cracked just slightly, just enough to be real. Not yet. Not because I don't trust you. Because the second I tell you, you can't unknow it. And once you know it, you're not safe the way you are right now. Ignorance is the only armor I've been able to give you, and I know that's not enough. I know it's not fair, but it's all I have. She stared at him under the string lights, mascara threatening for the second time in 3 months, and felt something in her chest crack right down the center. You don't get to decide what I can handle, she said quietly. I am not a child you're protecting. I am your wife. If there's danger, I want to know what it is so I can stand next to you in it, not get blindsided by it because you decided silence was kinder. He looked at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes, 18 years of training telling him to hold the line, and something newer, something that had crept in over 3 months of watching her cook badly and laugh easily and ask too many smart questions, telling him the line wasn't worth holding anymore. The valet pulled up with his car. Neither of them moved toward it. Soon, he said finally. I promise you, soon. It wasn't enough. They both knew it wasn't enough. But it was what he had, and she got in the car because the alternative was standing on a curb in heels, arguing in front of half her mother's social circle, and some fights you save for behind closed doors. The pendant came up again 3 nights later, and this time it broke something neither of them could put back. Serena had taken it to a jeweler on her lunch break, small, impulsive, the kind of decision born from weeks of frustration finally curdling into action. She told herself she just wanted it cleaned, the tarnish lifted so she could finally read the engraving that had been worn down to almost nothing. What she actually wanted was answers, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. The jeweler, an older man with a loop permanently fixed in one eye socket, turned the pendant over twice under his lamp before going very still. Where'd you get this? It's my husband's. Family piece, he said. Family piece. The jeweler set down his loop slowly, like the object had suddenly gotten heavier in his hands. Ma'am, this crest, I haven't seen this exact design in maybe 20 years. There was a family used to commission pieces like this. Old money. The kind of old money that doesn't advertise itself. He turned it once more under the light, frowning. Blackwell, I think. Or close to it. There was a story, way back. A kidnapping, I want to say. Big scandal at the time. Child went missing, never found. Whole case went cold. Serena's mouth had gone dry. A kidnapping. 18, 20 years back. I don't remember all the details, it was before my time in this shop, but the design, he tapped the pendant gently, almost reverently. This design isn't something you pick up at a department store. This was made for a specific family. If your husband's carrying this, either it's a coincidence or he's got a much bigger story than family piece. She left the jeweler's with the pendant clutched in her fist so tight the worn edges bit into her palm, and she didn't remember the drive home, didn't remember climbing the stairs, didn't fully come back to herself until she was standing in the living room with Lucien staring at her, at the pendant in her hand, his face draining of color in a way she'd never seen on him before. Not anger, not even fear exactly, but something closer to a man watching the last wall of his life come down in real time. "You took it to a jeweler," he said. Flat, quiet, worse than shouting. "I wanted to know what it was. That pendant is the only thing connecting me to—" He stopped himself, hand dragging down over his face, and for the first time in 4 months, she watched him lose his composure completely, shoulders dropping, breath coming fast and uneven, a man finally cracking under weight he'd been carrying alone for nearly 2 decades. "Do you have any idea what you might have just started? Tell me what it is, Lucian. Stop protecting me from the truth and just tell me." "It's me!" The words came out of him like something torn loose, raw and furious and terrified all at once. "That pendant is me, Serena. It's the only thing I had on me when I was found at 6 years old with no memory of my own name, raised by people who weren't my family, told my whole life some version of a story that never made sense. That jeweler just told you there was a kidnapping 18 years ago. There was. It was me. I was the kid who got stolen. I don't know who took me or why. I don't know if the people responsible are still out there, and I have spent my entire adult life trying very hard not to find out, because the one thing I do know is that whoever did it had the kind of money and power that doesn't just disappear, and if they find out I'm still alive, still asking questions, they will come for both of us." The apartment went silent, except for both of them breathing too hard, the pendant sitting between them on the coffee table like a small, ordinary, devastating bomb. "Adrian," Serena whispered, the jeweler's word coming back to her, the half-remembered name attached to old money and an old scandal. "Are you saying your real name is—" "I don't know what my real name is." His voice broke completely now, no wall left to hide behind. "I don't know who I am, Serena. I've spent 18 years building a life around a stranger's identity because it was the only way to survive, and you just handed a piece of that secret to a jeweler with a loop and a memory for old gossip." Her phone buzzed on the counter. She almost ignored it. Almost, except some instinct. Some old survival reflex made her cross the room and look. A text. Unknown number. "Tell your husband the Blackwell family sends their regards. We've been looking for him a very long time." She read it twice before the words actually landed, before the floor seemed to tilt under her feet, before she turned to Lucien with the phone shaking in her outstretched hand, and watched every last trace of color drain from his face as he read it too. "They know," he said very quietly, the voice of a man watching 18 years of careful invisibility collapse in real time. "Serena, they already know. They orchestrated cinematic narrative twist with psychological depth and emotional intensity." Lucien moved before she could blink, crossing the apartment in 3 long strides and yanking every blind shut, plunging the living room into a kind of dim, suffocating twilight that made the whole space feel smaller, more dangerous, like the walls themselves had started listening. "Get away from the windows." "Lucien, you're scaring me." "Good. Be scared. Fear keeps people alive." He grabbed his phone off the counter, thumb moving fast over the screen, dialing a number she'd never seen him call before. Not a contact name, just digits, the kind of number a person memorizes because writing it down anywhere is its own liability. His breathing had gone short and controlled, the rhythm of a man forcing calm onto a body that wanted to do anything but. "Marcus, it's me. We have a situation." Whatever the voice on the other end said made Lucien's jaw tighten until a muscle jumped visibly along the bone. "No, listen to me. Someone made contact with my wife directly. Text message, unknown number, said the Blackwell family sends their regards." A pause. "I don't care how, I care that it happened. I need eyes on this apartment in the next 10 minutes, and I need to know who else has been asking questions about me in the last month. Quietly. I want names." He hung up without saying goodbye, a habit she was only now noticing. Economy in everything, no wasted motion, no wasted words, a man who'd trained every soft edge off himself a long time ago. "Who's Marcus?" she said. "Someone who works for me." "You don't have a job that requires someone who works for you, Lucien. You do IT support for a logistics—" "I lied." He said it flat, fast, like ripping a bandage off dead skin. "About all of it. The job's real on paper. I show up sometimes. I sign things sometimes. But it's not what pays for this apartment or that watch you've never asked me about or the car you've never seen me drive, because I don't drive it around you. I have resources, Serena, more than you can imagine. And right now, those resources are the only thing standing between you and whatever's coming through that door. She sat down hard on the arm of the couch, legs suddenly unwilling to hold her. What's coming through the door? I don't know yet. That's what scares me. He crossed to her, crouched down so they were eye level, and for a moment the wall dropped completely, leaving behind something raw and pleading she'd never seen on his face before. I need you to trust me for the next 24 hours without asking why. Can you do that? You're asking me to trust a man who's lied to me for 4 months. I know. That's not a small thing to ask. I know that too. His hands found hers, gripping tight enough to hurt, grounding them both. But it's what I have. Please, Serena. She looked at him a long moment, anger and fear braiding together into something she couldn't name, and finally nodded once, sharp, a soldier accepting orders she hated. What? Marcus arrived 40 minutes later. Not through the front door, she noticed, but through the service entrance off the parking garage, a heavy-set man in an unremarkable jacket who moved with the quiet economy of someone trained to disappear into crowds. He didn't introduce himself with a handshake. He simply nodded at Lucian, eyes flicking once toward Serena with an assessment so quick and clinical it made her skin crawl, and then sat down at the kitchen table and opened a laptop like he'd done this 100 times in 100 different kitchens. Text came from a burner, he said, no preamble. Routed through 3 relays before it hit a real tower. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. This isn't some amateur trying to scare you. Can you trace it back? Working on it. But I want to talk about something else first. Marcus glanced at Serena again, and this time the look lasted longer, weighing whether she belonged in the room. Lucien gave a single nod. She stays. And Marcus exhaled through his nose, unhappy but compliant. 3 people in the last 6 weeks have been asking questions about you that go past normal due diligence. A jeweler called a contact of his asking about pendant designs tied to old missing person cases. That's new? That's today? That's probably your wife's doing, and we'll deal with the fallout. But before that, 2 separate background checks, run through private firms, both flagged your employment history as inconsistent with claimed credentials. Somebody's been digging on you for over a month, DeLuca. Before tonight. Lucian's expression didn't change, but Serena watched his hand curl slowly into a fist on the table. Who runs background checks like that? Corporate security. Could be a rival firm doing competitive intelligence. Could be... Marcus hesitated. Say it. Could be Cross Holdings. The name meant nothing to Serena. It clearly meant everything to Lucian, whose face went through 3 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds. Recognition, then something like dread, then a cold, settling fury that made him look, for the first time since she'd met him, genuinely dangerous. Damien Cross, Lucian said quietly. You know him? Not personally. Heard the name in passing. Tech investor, family money, always sniffing around acquisitions in the AI space. Lucian stood, pacing now, hands dragging through his hair in a gesture so unlike his usual stillness that it frightened her more than anything Marcus had said. If Cross is the one who sent that text, he's not just digging for blackmail material. He's connecting dots I spent 18 years making sure nobody could connect. What dots? Serena said. Lucian stopped pacing, looked at her like he'd forgotten, for one merciful moment, that she didn't know any of this yet, and now had to remember all over again that she did. There's something else I haven't told you, he said. Something bigger than the pendant. Marcus's eyes flicked sharply toward him, a warning, not in front of her, not yet, but Lucien ignored it. You know the name Phoenix? Serena blinked, caught off guard by the sudden left turn. The AI guy? The anonymous developer everyone's been trying to identify for like 5 years? That Phoenix? Yeah. What about him? Lucien held her gaze, and something in his stillness told her the answer before he said it out loud. It's me. The room went very quiet. Even Marcus, who'd clearly known this for years, watched her reaction like it mattered. like her face was the only data point left to track. That's not, Serena laughed, short and disbelieving, the sound of someone trying to find solid ground that kept sliding away. Phoenix built systems that 3 different governments use. Phoenix turned down a 9-figure acquisition offer from a company I literally used to interview for a job at. Phoenix has reshaped like half the industry from total anonymity for years. And you're telling me that's you? The man who can't operate the dishwasher without reading the manual? The dishwasher thing's real, he said, and there was something almost helpless in it, an attempt at lightness that died instantly under the weight of everything else in the room. Everything else is also real. I built Phoenix's core architecture when I was 23, working out of a 1-bedroom apartment with no name, no face, no history anyone could trace, because the people who raised me trained me from childhood to never, ever let my real identity touch anything I built. I didn't understand why for a long time. I do now. Why? He looked at Marcus. Marcus gave the smallest possible nod, the kind that said, we're past the point where this stays buried, might as well finish it. Because somewhere out there is a family who lost a 6-year-old boy 18 years ago, in circumstances nobody's ever fully explained. And somewhere out there is whoever benefited from that boy disappearing. If I'd grown up under my real name, with my real history attached to anything I accomplished, I'd have made myself a target the second I started succeeding. So I buried it. All of it. I became nobody on purpose, because nobody was the only version of me that was safe. And now somebody's found you anyway. Now somebody's found me anyway. Serena sat with that for a long moment, feeling the floor of her entire understanding of her own life tilt sideways and resettle into a completely different shape. 4 months ago, she'd married a man on a dare. Certain she knew exactly what she was getting. Modest, kind, a little guarded, beneath her family's expectations in every way that used to matter to her. Now she was sitting in a dim apartment learning her husband was simultaneously a kidnapped heir to some unnamed fortune and one of the most influential and secretive minds in modern technology. And somewhere out there a man named Damian Cross had apparently decided both of those facts were worth investigating. Why would Cross care, she said slowly, about a kidnapping from 18 years ago? Marcus and Lucian exchanged a look that lasted half a second too long. Marcus, Lucian said, pull the Blackwell case file, the one we've never been able to fully access. You sure? I'm sure. Marcus typed for a long moment, and the laptop screen filled with scanned documents, old newspaper clippings, a grainy photograph of a mansion behind iron gates, and finally, a family tree rendered in faded ink, names connected by careful lines, a structure of inheritance and blood going back generations. Lucien leaned over the screen, and Serena watched his finger trace down through names she didn't recognize until it stopped on one branch, one name circled in red by whoever had compiled the file years ago. Victor Blackwell, surviving brother, inherited controlling stake in Blackwell Technologies following disappearance of nephew Adrian Blackwell, age 6. Below it, a second name connected by a thin line denoting a different branch of the family, married in rather than born in. Damian Cross, son of Victor Blackwell's late sister-in-law, raised within the Blackwell household following the disappearance. Lucien went very still. He grew up in the same house, he said quietly. Cross grew up in the house I was taken from. But the realization seemed to hollow something out of him in real time. Serena watched it happen. Watched the controlled, careful man she'd married give way to someone colder, someone calculating with a speed and ruthlessness that frightened her even as some new, unfamiliar part of her found it magnetic. He'd have been what, 12? 13? Lucien's voice had dropped into something almost clinical. Old enough to remember. Old enough to know exactly what happened to me if he was in that house when it did. You think he was involved, Marcus said. I think it's a hell of a coincidence that the man digging into my background right now grew up in the exact house I disappeared from and inherited a fortune that should have included me. Lucien straightened, something in his posture shifting, not panic anymore, something harder underneath it. I think Victor Blackwell built an empire on the assumption his nephew was never coming back. I think somebody in that house made sure of it, And I think Damian Cross either knows exactly what happened to me or he's spent 18 years wondering the same thing I have. So what do we do? Serena said. We find out which. Lucian turned to Marcus. I want everything on Victor Blackwell's financials from the year I disappeared. Every transaction, every shell company, every favor called in, somebody paid for what happened to me. Money like that leaves footprints if you know where to dig. That's federal-level forensic accounting, Lucian. That's not a weekend project. Then we don't sleep this weekend. Marcus closed the laptop halfway, hesitating. There's something else you should hear before I start digging into a fortune that big. People who built empires on a 6-year-old's disappearance don't sit quietly while someone audits them. If Cross already knows who you are, and that text suggests somebody does, the smart move on his end isn't blackmail, it's containment. Meaning the safest play for whoever's behind this is making sure you never get the chance to prove anything. Marcus's eyes flicked to Serena, deliberate, unmistakable. And the easiest way to control a man like you isn't threatening him directly. It's threatening the thing he can't stand to lose. The implication landed in the room like a dropped weight. Serena felt her stomach drop straight through the floor, and Lucien's whole body went rigid beside her, a coiled, dangerous stillness that hadn't been there a minute ago. They wouldn't, Serena started. They already texted your wife's personal phone within hours of her taking a family pendant to a jeweler, Marcus said, flat, unsentimental. A man whose job was naming the worst-case scenario before it happened, so nobody got caught flat-footed by it. I'd say they would is already proven. The question now is how far. Lucian stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. She needs protection. Now. Tonight. I can have 2 men here within the hour. Make it 4. Lucien! Serena reached for his arm, trying to anchor him, trying to anchor herself, trembling now in a way she couldn't entirely blame on fear alone. There was something else underneath it, a strange, vertiginous thrill at watching her quiet husband transform, in real time, into someone capable of mobilizing armed men with a phone call. This is insane. 3 hours ago I thought you fixed printers for a living. I know. I don't know if I can... You don't have to decide anything tonight. His voice gentled, just slightly. The first softness he'd shown since the text message arrived, and he cupped her face in both hands, forcing her eyes up to his. I need you safe first. Everything else. We figure out after. She nodded, throat too tight to speak, and let him pull her into a hug that felt, despite everything, despite the lies, despite the strangers in her kitchen, despite a fortune and a kidnapping and a man named Damian Cross, who apparently wanted something from a husband she barely recognized, oddly, devastatingly real set. The call came at 2 in the morning, and it was Marcus's voice that woke them both, terse and urgent through the phone on the nightstand. Lucienne, we have a problem. What kind? The kind where I need you to turn on the news right now. Lucienne fumbled for the remote with hands that weren't quite steady, and the television flared to life in the dark bedroom, casting harsh blue light across both their faces. A news anchor's voice filled the room, crisp and practiced, utterly indifferent to the way her words were about to detonate everything. Breaking story tonight involving Blackwell Technologies, where sources close to the family have confirmed that DNA testing conducted independently has identified the long-missing heir, Adrian Blackwell, missing since the age of 6 in a kidnapping that shocked the city nearly 2 decades ago. Sources indicate the individual has been living under an assumed identity, and family representatives say they intend to pursue legal recognition immediately. Serena sat bolt upright, the blanket falling away, staring at the screen as a photograph appeared beside the anchor's head. Grainy, clearly pulled from some security camera or paparazzi long lens, but unmistakably, devastatingly, Lucian caught mid-stride outside their own apartment building just days ago. They leaked it, Lucian said, voice barely above a whisper, the particular hollow tone of a man watching 18 years of careful invisibility detonate on live television in front of an audience of millions. Someone leaked it before I had a chance to control any of it. Who would... Cross. He said the name like a verdict, already moving, already pulling on clothes with hands that shook with something far past fear now, something closer to rage. He's not trying to blackmail me. He's trying to force my hand before I'm ready, Push me into the spotlight on his timeline instead of mine. Make sure whatever happens next happens on his terms, not mine. His phone began ringing immediately. Then again. Then a third call stacking on top of the first two. Numbers she didn't recognize. Names appearing she'd never heard him mention. Blackwell Technologies. Legal. Unknown. Press. And then, devastatingly, a name she did recognize glowing on the screen with a kind of cruel irony that made her stomach turn. Vanessa Hale. Lucian stared at the screen for a long beat before answering, voice flat with disbelief. What? Even through the speaker, even from across the room, Serena could hear Vanessa's voice crack with something that might have been genuine devastation or might have been the most expensive performance of her life. Lucian? Oh my God! Is it true? Is this real? You're Adrian Blackwell? Lucian, why didn't you tell me? We were together for 2 years. I would have... He hung up without answering, jaw tight enough to ache, and threw the phone onto the bed like it had burned him. She'd have stayed, Serena said quietly, watching his face. If she'd known. That's what she's saying. She'd have married the heir. I know exactly what she's saying. Outside, beyond the bedroom window, the city had already begun to wake to the story. A low hum of distant sirens, headlights sweeping the street below in numbers that felt wrong for this hour. And somewhere, already, the first vans bearing television call letters beginning the slow crawl toward their building. Lucian crossed to the window and looked down at the gathering chaos below. And Serena watched his reflection in the glass. Saw the exact moment something in him finally, completely, hardened. The last soft edges of the careful man she'd married burning away into something forged instead, something built for war. They wanted me exposed, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Fine, I'm exposed. He turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes was nothing like the gentle, guarded stranger from the courthouse steps 4 months ago. But they just made the worst mistake of their lives, because the man they thought they could blackmail and control just disappeared along with my old name. What's left isn't going to be quiet, and it isn't going to be careful, and it sure as hell isn't going to be afraid anymore. Below them, the first reporter's spotlight swept up the side of the building, briefly illuminating the bedroom window in a hard white wash before sliding past, and somewhere across the city, in a tower with no name on the directory, Damian Cross watched the same breaking news segment with a small, satisfied smile, utterly unaware that the man he'd just dragged into the light had spent 18 years building exactly the kind of power that didn't need shadows to be lethal. Orchestrated climactic screenplay segment with intense pacing and visceral detail. The Global AI Summit's green room smelled like fresh paint and nervous sweat, and Lucian stood in front of a mirror he wasn't really seeing, listening to his own pulse hammer in his ears loud enough to drown out the assistant rattling off his schedule. 5 minutes to stage, Mr. DeLuca? Or... She hesitated, flustered, clearly still adjusting to the press releases that had gone out overnight. Mr. Blackwell, sorry, we weren't sure which... DeLuca's fine, he said, voice rougher than he meant it. For now... She left him alone. He gripped the edge of the counter with both hands and looked at his own reflection. 3 days unshaven, eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. A man who'd spent 18 years building a wall and watched it come down in under 72 hours. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Cross just arrived. Not alone. Victor Blackwell's here too. First time he's been seen in public in 6 years. Lucian's stomach dropped, then hardened. He texted back one word. Good. The door opened behind him without a knock. Serena, in a dark blazer she'd bought yesterday because nothing in her old wardrobe felt like armor anymore, closed it behind her and crossed the room fast, hands finding his face, forcing him to look at her instead of the mirror. Hey, breathe, you're shaking. I'm fine. You're not. Your hands are ice. She pressed her palms flatter against his jaw, grounding him the way she'd learned to do over the last week of chaos, lawyers, leaked photographs, reporters camped outside their building. Tell me what you need. I need this to be over. His voice cracked, just slightly, just for her. I've spent my whole life being someone else's secret. In 10 minutes I walk out there and I'm not anybody's secret anymore. There's no going back from this. Good. She said it fierce, certain, nothing like the trembling woman who'd asked about a locked metal box 4 months ago. You don't want to go back. Going back means hiding again. I didn't marry a man who hides. You married a man you barely knew. I married exactly the right man. She kissed him once, hard, like a promise sealed in front of a firing squad. Now go be him. Out loud for once. The auditorium held 4,000 people and somehow felt smaller than the green room had. Every seat full, every camera in the building trained on the stage where the summit's host, a sleek, practiced woman who clearly had no idea what she was about to unleash, gestured toward the wings with a showman's flourish. For years, the technology world has speculated about the identity of one of the most influential and elusive minds in artificial intelligence. Tonight, for the first time, Phoenix steps into the light. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Adrian Blackwell. The applause hit like a physical wave. 4,000 people on their feet, phones raised, a roar that felt less like celebration and more like a building about to come down. Lucian walked out from the wings into a wall of light so bright it briefly blinded him, every nerve in his body screaming at him to turn around, to run, to disappear back into the safe gray anonymity he'd spent 18 years perfecting. He didn't run. He found Serena's eyes in the front row. She'd insisted, no security buffer, I want you to be able to find me. And something in his chest steadied. He reached the podium, gripped both sides of it, looked out at 4,000 faces and 1,000 more cameras, and let the silence stretch one beat longer than comfortable, the way he'd learned in another life entirely that silence before violence always meant something was about to change. My name, he said, voice carrying clean and hard through the sound system, is Adrian Blackwell. Some of you know me as Phoenix. Most of you, until 3 days ago, didn't know me at all. That was the point. For 18 years, anonymity was the only thing standing between me and the people who wanted me erased before I ever had the chance to matter. Tonight that ends. He saw it happen before he understood it. A ripple at the back of the auditorium, not in the tech crowd, not in the reporters, but in a cluster of older men near the rear exits, men in dark, expensive, unshowy suits. The kind of men who didn't attend technology summits, didn't belong in rooms full of venture capitalists and software architects. One of them stood first, an old man, silver-haired, scarred along one side of his jaw in a way that wasn't from any accident Lucian recognized from this life. Then another stood, and another, and then, in a slow, terrible wave that rippled backward through that entire section of the auditorium, every man in that section rose to his feet, and every head bowed. Not in applause, not in the loose, enthusiastic way the tech crowd was still cheering, but in something disciplined, ritualistic, absolute. The applause around them began to falter as people noticed, confusion spreading outward in concentric circles, 4,000 voices dropping into murmurs as the entire room tried to understand what they were watching. Lucien stood frozen at the podium, heart slamming against his ribs so hard it hurt, because he recognized exactly what he was seeing even though some desperate part of him had spent 18 years hoping he'd never have to. He recognized the bow. He'd grown up watching men like that bow to a portrait in a house he barely remembered, a portrait of a face that, he understood now, with sick, vertiginous clarity, must have looked exactly like his own. Vanessa Hale, seated near the front in a dress clearly chosen for maximum visibility on camera, went pale watching the same scene, her mouth opening slightly as understanding arrived too late to do her any good at all. In the third row, Damian Cross sat very still, hands gripping his armrests white-knuckled, watching dozens of men he'd spent his entire adult life learning to fear bow their heads to a man he'd dismissed 3 months ago as nobody, as help, as a problem he could blackmail into silence with a single text message. "What?" Serena whispered, staring up at her husband, "is happening?" Lucien's voice, when he finally spoke again, had changed, lower, harder, carrying an authority that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago, the voice of a man who just understood, in real time, exactly how much further his secret extended than even he had known. "I came up here tonight to tell you about artificial intelligence," he said, and his hands had gone steady now, gripping the podium not for support, but for control. "I'm going to do that. But first, I think some people in this room need to hear something else. He looked directly at the silver-haired man still standing in the back, head bowed, waiting. I don't fully understand what I'm looking at right now, Lucian said, voice carrying through the stunned silence of the auditorium. But I understand enough. 18 years ago, I was taken from a family that built half the technology infrastructure this industry runs on. I've spent every year since trying to understand who I really am, one piece at a time. Tonight, apparently, I'm finding out there's more to that story than even I was prepared for. The silver-haired man finally raised his head, eyes meeting Lucien's across the length of the auditorium, and what passed between them was unmistakable, even from that distance. Recognition, old and absolute, the look of a man finally seeing a face he'd waited a generation to see again. Boss, the man said, just loud enough to carry in the dead silence, 2 syllables that detonated through the room like a confession. Every camera in the building swiveled toward him. Well, backstage, 90 seconds later, chaos had fully arrived. Marcus shoved through a knot of security and event staff, face white, phone pressed to his ear with his free hand clamped over the other. Lucien. Adrian. Whatever the hell I'm calling you now. We need to move. This is not a contained situation anymore. Every news outlet in the building just heard a man call you boss on live television, and I am getting calls I do not know how to answer. What did he mean? Lucian said, gripping Marcus by the shoulder hard enough to bruise. Marcus, what did that man mean? Marcus's silence lasted half a second too long, and in that half second, Lucian understood that the man he'd trusted with his life for 6 years had known something he hadn't. You knew. I suspected. Marcus. Your biological father, Marcus said, low and fast, words tumbling out now that the dam had finally broken, wasn't just a Blackwell. He married into the family. Your mother's the Blackwell blood. Your father came from somewhere else entirely, somewhere I was never able to fully document until about 8 months ago, when I found banking records connecting his name to a network of holding companies that... He stopped, exhaled hard. Your father ran the largest organized crime syndicate on the East Coast, Lucien. Quietly. From the shadows, same as you built Phoenix. He died the same year you disappeared, and every family under his authority has spent 18 years waiting for a successor who supposedly died with him. The floor seemed to tilt under Lucian's feet. They didn't think I died. They didn't know what happened to you, same as everyone else. They just kept waiting. Marcus's eyes were wide, frightened in a way Lucian had never seen on him before. And about 90 seconds ago, every man in that back section just watched you walk on stage and recognized your father's face staring back at them. Through the wall, the auditorium had erupted into full bedlam. Reporters shouting questions, security trying to control a crowd that no longer wanted to be controlled. And somewhere underneath it all, a single voice rising clear and furious enough to cut through the noise. Get me Victor Blackwell, that voice was shouting. Get me a statement, get me anything. Lucian pushed past Marcus toward the stage door, chest heaving, sweat sticking his shirt to his spine despite the air conditioning, every instinct in his body screaming conflicting orders. Run, hide, disappear. You've spent your whole life disappearing. Do it now. Fighting against something newer and harder, something that had been building in him for 3 days since the leak first broke, and was finally completely awake. He stopped at the door, hand on the frame, and looked back at Marcus. Find Damien Cross, now. I want him in a room before he leaves this building. Lucien, that's not smart. You're not thinking clearly. I am thinking exactly clearly for the first time in 18 years. His voice had gone flat, cold, final. He spent 3 months trying to bury me before I figured out what I actually am. He just watched it fail in front of 4,000 witnesses. A cornered animal does something stupid in the next 10 minutes, Marcus, and I would very much like to be standing in the room when he does it. He found Damien Cross not cornered but waiting, standing alone in a service corridor behind the auditorium with the kind of stillness that wasn't calm, so much as barely restrained, hands shoved deep in his pockets, jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. You knew, Lucian said, closing the distance between them fast, years of careful restraint burning away with every step. All this time, you grew up in that house. You knew exactly who I was. I knew there used to be a kid, Damien said, voice low, rough, none of the polished investor smoothness from his office 3 weeks ago. I knew he disappeared. I was 12, Lucien, Adrian, whatever you want to be called, 12 years old. You think a 12-year-old gets a say in what happens in a house like that? Don't. Lucien's hands had curled into fists without his permission. Don't you dare stand here and play the helpless child. You ran a background check on me before I even knew the truth. You leaked my identity to the press before I was ready. That's not a scared 12-year-old. That's a grown man protecting something. Damien's composure cracked, just slightly, something raw and old surfacing underneath the calculation. You want to know what I was protecting? My entire life, Lucien. And everything I built standing in the shadow of an uncle who never once looked at me without seeing the nephew who should have inherited everything instead of me. I spent 18 years being the consolation prize in that family, and then 3 months ago I find out the real heir's alive, hiding in plain sight, building exactly the kind of empire that would erase everything I scraped together. His voice broke on the last word, fury and something almost like grief tangled together. So yeah, I dug. I leaked it. I wanted it over before you had the chance to take the rest of what's mine. None of this was ever yours. It was the only thing I had. The shout echoed down the corridor, raw enough that 2 security guards at the far end turned, hands moving instinctively toward their radios. Lucien stepped in close enough to see the sweat beaded along Damien's hairline, close enough to feel the man's breath coming fast and ragged. Tell me what happened to me, Lucien said, voice gone dangerously quiet. 18 years ago. You were in that house. You said it yourself. Tell me who took me, and maybe there's a version of tonight where you walk away from this with something left. Damien's jaw worked, eyes darting once toward the security guards, now moving closer, weighing his options with the desperate speed of a man who understood in that exact moment that every door in his life had just slammed shut at once. You really want to know? His laugh came out broken, ugly. Ask your uncle. Ask Victor. Ask him why a man who supposedly searched for his missing nephew for 18 years never once hired an investigator who actually wanted to find you. Ask him why the company restructured its entire ownership the same month you disappeared, in a way that made him richer than he'd ever been with you in the picture. Damien's eyes had gone bright, fevered, a man finally saying the thing he'd swallowed for 2 decades. I didn't take you, Lucien, but I've spent 18 years living in a house with the man who benefited most from you disappearing, and I never once asked him the hard question because I was scared of the answer and because some sick, ugly part of me liked being the only son left standing. Lucien felt something go very cold and very still inside his chest, the particular calm that came right before violence, the calm his body remembered even though his mind had spent 18 years trying to forget where it came from. Where is he, oh? Lucien, where is Victor Blackwell right now? Behind them, the corridor door burst open, and Marcus came through fast, face white, phone still in his hand. He's in the building, Marcus said, breathless. Green room 3, giving a statement to a reporter right now. And Lucien, you need to see this. All of it just hit the wire. He turned the phone screen outward, and Lucien's stomach dropped reading the breaking headline scrolling across it. A financial disclosure leaked within the hour, numbers and dates that made his vision tunnel with fury before he'd even finished the first sentence, because there, in black and white, 20 years of carefully laundered guilt sat exposed for the entire world to read, and somewhere down that same corridor, close enough that Lucien could already hear the practiced grieving cadence of a man performing innocence for a camera, Victor Blackwell was about to discover that the nephew he'd buried in paperwork 18 years ago had just walked back into his life, carrying the kind of fury that no amount of money had ever managed to bury for good. Green Room 3 had gone quiet by the time Lucien reached the door, the kind of quiet that meant the reporter inside had just heard something worth not interrupting. He pushed through without knocking. Victor Blackwell sat in a low chair under soft interview lighting, silver hair combed back, a face built for boardrooms and eulogies alike. Mid-sentence, about the joy of a family finally made whole when he looked up and saw his nephew standing in the doorway, chest heaving, 18 years of buried fury written plain across his face. The reporter's eyes went wide. Her cameraman, sharper than he looked, kept rolling. "Everyone out," Lucian said. "Now." "Adrian." Victor rose slowly, arms already opening for an embrace that never had a chance of landing, his voice pitched warm and rehearsed, the voice of a man who'd practiced grief he'd never actually felt. "My God, look at you. We've waited so long for—" "Don't." Lucien didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Don't perform for me in front of a camera, Victor. I just spent 10 minutes in a hallway listening to Damien tell me you never once hired an investigator who actually wanted to find me. I just read a financial disclosure with my name on transactions I never authorized, dated the same month I disappeared, restructuring an entire company in your favor. So before you finish that sentence, I want you to think very hard about whether you'd like to finish it with a camera still running." Victor's warm expression didn't crack so much as recalibrate, something colder sliding into place behind his eyes, the practiced grief of 30 seconds ago dissolving into the flat calculation of a man assessing how much of the truth had already escaped containment. "Turn that off," Victor said to the cameraman, voice gone hard. "Leave it on," Lucien said. "I want this part documented." The reporter, sensing the story of her career unfolding in real time, didn't move. Victor's jaw tightened, glancing once at the lens, understanding with visible, sick clarity that he no longer controlled the room the way he'd controlled every room for 18 years. "You don't understand what you're walking into," Victor said quietly, all the warmth gone now, replaced by something tired and dangerous. "I built that company from nothing after you vanished. I kept it alive. I kept your mother from losing her mind with grief. I kept the family name from collapsing into scandal. I did the work nobody else was willing to do. You profited from my disappearance and never looked for me." Lucian's voice cracked on the last word, the first real fracture he'd allowed himself since walking off that stage. 18 years, Victor. 18 years I spent wondering why nobody came, why no investigator ever knocked on a door I was hiding behind, why a family with this much money and this much reach let a 6-year-old boy just disappear into the system without a trace. Now I know why. You didn't want me found. You needed me gone. That's not... Federal agents are already reviewing those disclosures. Marcus's voice came from the doorway, calm, final. A man laying down the last card in a hand that had taken 18 years to assemble. "I sent everything an hour ago. Banking records, shell company filings, the original guardianship paperwork that should have triggered a custody investigation and never did. It's out of our hands now, Victor. It's federal." Something in Victor Blackwell finally broke. Not into remorse, Lucien would understand later, but into the specific ugly panic of a man watching consequences arrive for the first time in a life built entirely around avoiding them. He sat back down heavily in the interview chair, hands trembling against his knees, an old man suddenly looking every one of his 71 years. "I didn't take you," he said very quietly, to the floor, not to Lucien. "I want that understood. Whatever else I didn't take you from that house." "Then who did?" Victor's silence answered before his mouth did. Lucien crossed the room and crouched in front of him, forcing eye contact, voice gone low and lethal. "Who took me, Victor?" "I paid people to look the other way," Victor whispered, finally, the confession arriving in pieces, the way confessions usually do when a man has spent 2 decades building walls around them. "There was a faction inside your father's organization that wanted him gone. Old rivals, men who thought a 6-year-old heir was a liability they couldn't tolerate while consolidating power. They came to me, offered me control of the company in exchange for my silence about where you'd gone. I told myself you were safer hidden than found. I told myself a lot of things." His eyes finally lifted, wet, ruined, an old man's face collapsing under the weight of a truth he'd carried alone for 18 years. "I was wrong about all of it. I know that now. I knew it then too. I just didn't have the courage to undo it." The room held its breath. Even the reporter, hardened by a career of bad news, looked faintly sick. Lucien stood slowly, every part of him vibrating with something he couldn't fully name. Not triumph, not quite grief, something rawer and more complicated sitting underneath both. He thought of Marcus's words from a captain 3 hours earlier, Several of the captains are asking permission to handle this the old way, boss. One word from you, and it's done by morning, and felt for one terrible second exactly how easy it would be to let that happen. He didn't say the word. You're going to give a full statement to federal investigators, Lucien said instead, voice steady now. The fury banked down into something colder and more useful. Everything. Every name. Every payment. Every captain who came to you 18 years ago. You're going to do it because it's the only thing you have left to offer anyone. And because the alternative is finding out exactly how unprotected a man becomes once his nephew stops shielding him out of habit. Victor nodded, broken, silent, and Lucien turned and walked out of the room without looking back, leaving an old man alone with a camera still recording, and a truth finally too large to contain. The captains found him in a service stairwell 20 minutes later, 3 of them, the silver-haired man from the auditorium at their center, all still in the dark, unshowy suits that had no business at a technology summit, waiting with the patient stillness of men who'd waited 18 years for this exact conversation. "Boss," the silver-haired man said again, and this time Lucien didn't flinch from it. "Marcus tells us Cross and Blackwell are finished, tells us you've got federal investigators moving on everyone responsible." He paused, weight in it. "Some of the families want a different kind of justice, the kind that doesn't wait for a courtroom. I know what they want. Word travels fast once people understand who you are. 3 calls already, asking for your blessing. Captains who'd cut a man's throat tonight if you said the word." The old man's eyes were steady, testing, not threatening. Genuinely uncertain, Lucien understood. What kind of man had just inherited 18 years of unanswered authority? "What's the word, boss?" Lucien stood in that stairwell, breathing hard, sweat cooling against his collar, and felt the full weight of an empire settle onto his shoulders for the first time. Not metaphorically, not as some abstract inheritance, but as an actual present choice standing in front of him in the shape of 3 old men waiting for permission to commit violence in his name. He thought about his father, a man he didn't remember, who'd built this exact authority out of fear and blood and silence. He thought about 18 years of hiding, of building something honest out of code and architecture because it was the one part of his life nobody could corrupt with old grudges. He thought about Serena, waiting somewhere outside this building, who'd married a stranger on a dare and ended up married to all of this instead. "No," Lucien said. "Nobody touches Victor. Nobody touches Cross. The old world ends today. Justice does what bullets never could, slow, documented, public. I want every one of you to understand that the man standing in front of you isn't interested in running things the way my father did. I'm not going to pretend I have the right to undo 18 years of how this organization operated, but from today forward, it doesn't operate through fear and it doesn't operate through blood. You want to follow me? That's the deal. You don't like the deal, you're free to walk." Silence in the stairwell, long enough that Lucien genuinely didn't know which way it would break. Then the silver-haired man bowed his head again, slower this time, more deliberate, less ritual and more genuine choice. "The old world's been waiting a long time for someone who didn't want it anymore," he said quietly. "We'll follow that." The other 2 bowed as well, and something in Lucien's chest finally, after 18 years, came loose. He found Serena exactly where he'd left her, front row, now empty around her in the chaos of an auditorium still buzzing with reporters and stunned attendees, standing with her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding herself together by main force. He didn't say anything. He just crossed the distance between them and pulled her into him, and she came apart against his chest in a way she hadn't allowed herself to since the news first broke 3 days ago, shaking, crying, gripping the back of his shirt like he might disappear if she let go. "I thought you were never coming back out," she said into his collar. "I'm here." "Are you?" She pulled back enough to look at his face, searching it for damage, for the specific kind of fracture a man carries after confronting everyone who ever failed him in one night. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet." He brushed a thumb under her eye, wiping away mascara for the second time in their short, strange marriage, and managed something close to a real smile. "Ask me again in about a year." The months that followed moved differently than the chaos that had preceded them. Slower, heavier with paperwork instead of panic, the long gray business of consequences finally landing. Victor Blackwell's statement, given 2 days later under federal protection that felt more like custody, named 11 men involved in the conspiracy to disappear a 6-year-old child, men whose arrests played out over weeks on every news channel Serena eventually stopped watching, because the sight of her husband's stolen childhood, narrated by strangers, became its own kind of grief. Damian Cross took a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Victor. 8 years, reduced from what could have been life, a sentence that satisfied no one entirely, and left Lucien standing outside a courthouse for the second time that year, watching a different kind of ending close around a man he'd once, briefly, almost understood. "You could have buried him completely," Marcus said, standing beside Lucien on the courthouse steps as Damien was led away in handcuffs, refusing to look back at either of them. "After everything he did, nobody would have blamed you." "I thought about it." Lucien watched the prison transport pull away from the curb. 18 years of training tells you the only safe enemy is a destroyed one, but I spent my whole life being the thing somebody else tried to erase for convenience. I wasn't going to build my future doing the same thing to someone else, even him. Blackwell Technologies restructured within the year, Lucien stepping into a role as principal architect rather than chief executive, insisting on a board of independent directors who answered to shareholders and regulators instead of family loyalty. Phoenix's technology, finally attached to a real name, accelerated faster than anyone anticipated once the world understood whose mind had been behind it all along. Breakthroughs in medical diagnostics, in clean energy modeling, and systems that made other companies' decade-old roadmaps look antique overnight. Within 8 months, Blackwell Technologies sat at the top of every valuation chart in the industry. A company that had once nearly profited from a kidnapping now becoming, under different stewardship, something closer to what it should have been all along. Vanessa Hale tried, twice, to reach him through old mutual friends, each attempt a little more transparent than the last, each one ignored. The last anyone heard, Preston Cole's family fortune had taken a quiet but significant hit in a market downturn, and the engagement everyone had once envied had ended somewhere in the wreckage of it. Lucien heard about it secondhand and felt, to his own quiet surprise, almost nothing at all. Not satisfaction, not bitterness, just the flat, settled peace of a man who'd stopped needing anyone's verdict on his worth. The captains kept their word. Slowly, methodically, under Lucien's distant but absolute authority, the organization his father had built began dismantling its own worst instincts from the inside. Old rackets quietly dissolved, captains either retired with dignity or removed without ceremony, legitimate enterprises built up in place of the rot, all of it happening far from cameras, exactly the way Lucien preferred to fight every battle that mattered most. He found his mother in the spring. She'd been living 3 states away under a name that wasn't her own either, it turned out. Eleanor Voss, formerly Eleanor Blackwell, who disappeared from public life the same year her son vanished. Driven half-mad by grief and the family's refusal to properly investigate, eventually choosing to vanish herself rather than keep performing composure for cameras that never once helped find her boy. The reunion happened in a small house with a garden out back, nothing like the mansion Lucien had glimpsed in old case files. She opened the door and looked at him for a long, silent moment, hand pressed against her own mouth, 18 years collapsing into a single held breath. "Adrian," she whispered, and the name landed differently coming from her than it ever had from a stranger or a headline, landed like something returned rather than something assigned. He didn't correct her. For the first time in 18 years, the name fit. They didn't talk about the lost years all at once. Some wounds, Lucien was learning, didn't close through conversation so much as through time, through small repeated proofs that the person was actually staying this time. She came to the wedding reception he and Serena finally threw 6 months later, a small, quiet thing in a backyard, nothing like the courthouse scramble that had started it all, and cried through most of the ceremony, and Lucien held her hand through the part where he was supposed to be holding his bride's, and nobody in attendance thought that was anything but exactly right. Standing on their apartment balcony the following winter, dawn coming up gray and gold over a Washington skyline that no longer felt like a place he had to hide from, Lucien held the old pendant in his palm one final time, turning it over in the early light the way he'd done 10,000 times across 18 years of not knowing who he was. Serena came out behind him, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, one hand resting low and protective against the slight curve of her stomach. Twins, the doctor had confirmed 3 weeks ago, a fact that still made Lucien's chest go tight with something far past joy, something closer to disbelief that his life had room left in it for this kind of ordinary, undramatic happiness. "You've been out here a while," she said, settling against his side. "Just thinking." "About the pendant?" He looked down at it one more time. The worn engraving, the tarnish a jeweler had once offered to clean, the small, ordinary object that had once been the only thread connecting a lost boy to a name he didn't remember. He didn't need it anymore. He had the name now, freely given, finally true. He had a mother 3 states closer than she used to be, a father's empire being slowly, deliberately unmade into something better. A wife who'd married a stranger on a reckless dare and ended up choosing him all over again every day since, with full knowledge of exactly who he was. He closed his hand around the pendant one last time, feeling its familiar, worn shape against his palm, and then set it gently on the balcony railing instead of his pocket. Not thrown away, never that, just finally, peacefully retired. "I don't need it to remember anymore," he said. "I've got everything it used to stand for right here." Serena leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood together as the sun came fully up over the city. 2 people who'd built something real out of the wreckage of 2 ruined weddings and a stranger's impulsive yes, and whatever the world wanted to call him now. Phoenix, Adrian Blackwell, the quiet authority behind an empire he'd chosen to remake rather than rule by fear. None of those titles mattered half as much, standing there in the cold morning light, as the only one that had ever truly fit. Husband, father, home,